What is the story the Hansons of this world are going to tell us about China's arrival?
China says it's looked at the COVID lockdown, it looked at the George Floyd aftermath, it looks like the Biden administration, it looks at the DI woke revolution, it looks at the Green Revolution, and it understands us.
They're going to tell us, sadly, that the Chinese copied a lot of the United States, which is true but irrelevant. The newcomer always copies the old one. When the United States broke from Britain, you know what the Britain charged the United States with for the whole 19th century? Stealing our technology.
One American produces more goods and services than 4 Chinese, and our system doesn't work. So we're going to appropriate all their technology, and we're going to send 300,000 people over here to be taught there, and we're going to bring it all back, and we're going to have this communist, monolithic, authoritarian. We won't get into all this messy democracy, and we're going to beat them, and we're going to become a hegemon. And that's what they think.
Which had its grain of truth. It always does. But this sudden, they're stealing. This is, oh, how awful. What you're really revealing is you don't know anything about your own history. What are you doing?
When Robinson Erhardt invited Marxist economist Richard Wolff onto his podcast, I wasn't expecting to pause and reflect. As a longtime admirer of Victor Davis Hanson, I see the world through a lens shaped by tradition, responsibility, and cultural decline. But listening to Wolff challenge me, not because I agreed, but because his argument came from a completely different universe. Wolff isn't just any economist. He's a Professor Emeritus at UMass Amherst and a leading voice in Marxian economics, calling out capitalism not as flawed, but as the root of America's collapse.
The way that Victor accounted for the election is he sees it as part of a larger culture war between, on the one hand, the bi-coastal left-wing intellectual elite, and then on the other side, a more common folk that is simply competence-minded and down-to-earth and cares about skills and success and doesn't care about Ivy League degrees.
And has spokespeople like Mr. Hanson.
He is a farmer.
Yes, well, he is.
The left, as you know, has repeatedly pushed the envelope. They continue every day in their never-ending culture war. Well, author Victor Davis Hanson has written a fantastic new op-ed where he called that war a, quote, full-fledged cultural revolution against traditional America.
I don't know exactly, but I think they feel that if they're correct ideologically, then they get a pass on every type of behavior, and that behavior leads to sort of the destruction of institutions, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because they feel America was flawed in its origins. So you take here in California, we're facing $32 billion in debt, Pete. Why would a council or commission on reparations say that we're going to get $800 billion? Why not $1 trillion? But to African Americans, when we were a free state, that's 8 generations ago. And then when confronted with those realities, the commission says, well, we're willing to take it on installment. We're looking at the tragic death on the subway, and I thought, wow, this guy looks like he's a career criminal that was killed. I thought maybe he had arrest of 5, 7. How does somebody in the criminal justice system have an arrest record of 40 arrests, including violent assault, lewd conduct? And then his uncle weighed in, and I thought, wow, he's weighing in support of his deceased nephew. Maybe he has a criminal record. He's been arrested 70 times. What kind of criminal justice system, I guess ideologically, just excuse felony behavior 70 times?
On the one hand, I see this as connecting to your idea of change as well, because presumably the right wants change from this obsolete left ruling class. But I wonder if you see a similar culture war afoot.
I see people like him really trying and stretching to construct such an idea. But in my view, that's because it doesn't work. And they're worried about where all this might go. And this is for them, a much happier story than the one I tell. They don't want to deal with a declining empire. They don't want to deal with a capitalism that doesn't work. They want this to be all in the realm of the bad people on the coasts with their evil elitism versus the men and women of the soil. This game has been played by left-wingers, too. This is a very old way of thinking. He may not know it, but I could give him references if he wants about, where this game has been played before. I don't think the elites, whatever that quite means, on the coast have the power or the understanding to play the nice role of bad guy that his construct assigns to them. I understand what he's doing. It's all over the place. I'm sure he didn't claim he was the origin of this inside. He repeats it. And for me, it's empty.
I think the greatest danger to this country are the bi-coastal degreed class that have utter contempt and hatred of the middle class. And it's so strange. I just reviewed a book, Rural White Rage. And that's the argument that all of us in the middle class or upper middle class, or even the wealthy so-called white people, are going to destroy America. And it's just full of I've never seen such pathological rage. Certain people feel they can take it to the ultimate level to insult traditional America, and there's no consequences, whether Target or Disney or Bud Light. And you were talking about the FBI, Pete, but I thought maybe an FBI director might fib once, but how did Andrew McCabe lie 4 times? 3 times under oath. Clapper lied about the NSA under oath, the head of the NSA, and he just simply laughed it off as, well, it's the least untruthful answer. Or John Brennan lied twice under oath, CIA director. And James Comey, I thought when he's in there and Devin Nunes and people are interviewing, he might claim amnesia 10 or 20 times, but 245 times? So what I'm getting at is there's an arrogance that people feel that they can say or do whatever they want because ideologically they feel they're protected or exempt. And even if that destroys these institutions, we've destroyed the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, corporate America, the border, and I think traditional ecumenical racial relations. And it just keeps going as if it's a Jacobin or some type of updated French Revolution. And I don't think we in traditional America understand what's going on. Our enemies do, and that's why I think they're delighted about it.
Even if you believed it, you'd have to then explain, why do we have people on the coast who do what they do, say what they say, advocate what... You'd have to explain it. What, is there something in the air in California and New York that make them attract? I mean, stop. What is this? And it becomes dangerous because if it... In the hands of people less scrupulous than I hope Mr. Hanson is, this can become, a rural against urban, an educated against uneducated. That's where this goes in the hands of many. And he will bear responsibility because giving a veneer of respectability to this way of thinking is cheap in the end.
When East Palestine had that toxic plume and Biden wouldn't visit it, Pete Buttigieg wouldn't visit it. It was almost contempt. And so I think that group is this wealthy, bi-coastal, credentialed elite who really came out well under globalization and then created this false narrative that they were so smart, they were the masters of the universe.
Well, I think if you're an agnostic or an atheist, you're going to invent your own gods. And that's sort of a trope of philosophy. And they've invented these woke gods. For some, it's Mother Earth or a green deity. For some, it's redistribution or a woke goddess. And they feel that they have all the fervent belief of a true believer. And they're intolerant in a way that, a fundamentalist can be. And if you don't believe in transcendence, and they don't, then you have these material gods, and they're political, and they're not forgiving. And so what they do is, if you're a true believer in the left, they feel that certain privileges accrue to them. They're exempt from the full force of the law. They're able to go into a cake person and say, you're going to bake this cake, no matter if it's against your religion, but that wouldn't occur to us. You can't do that back to us.
The age when Americans get married has gone from 23 to about 28.
the age when they have their first child has gone all the way up into their early 30s. The fertility rate just in 25 years has gone from 2.1 to 1.7. The age when they can buy a house has gone up to their middle and late 30s. And, we're back up to a high inability to buy a house. We only have about 63%. We were up to 64. I think now we're 62%. I'm going to correct myself, that are homeowners. And I think this is true of the Western world in general. It's sort of what Tocqueville said in Democracy in America, that you would have a prolonged adolescence when there was not an economically viable system of free market capitalism that allowed the middle class to thrive and to profit and to have property, pass it on, a home. Then they would become wards of the state.
Just like female sports. We had 50 years of feminists trying to get equity for women, and all of a sudden we have biological males that are cleaning up and destroying records of women and having an unfair advantage. And they've done more damage to female equity than 100 years of chauvinist male pigs in sports. And no one says a word because ideologically that's considered an exempt group. But everybody knows that if you're a male and you transition to female, you're going to have a biological advantage. But on the other hand, they tell us, no, you're purely female. There's a biological difference. So it just falls on deaf ears. So I think we're in America, look at all of these things and we think, this is not the old politics. This is not the in party, the out party, the left, the right. This is something new. This is beyond the 60s cultural revolution. This is kind of like Maoism, where it's totality.
Yes.
They want to go into every aspect of our life, private life, economic, political, social, cultural, and change it and ideological. And they're going to reward people who follow that, and they're going to punish people that say, not this pig, I'm not going to do it.
I understand the effort to make this a culture war is, in my judgment, an attempt to distract attention from other dimensions which not only explain the story better, but help us understand why that culture war even exists. What is its origin, its cause? Otherwise, you start with a culture war. What is that? How are you going to ground that? And by the way, I don't know Mr. Hanson, but that kind of argument then becomes grounded in stories of education. The political complexity of the United States that I've been talking about was not significantly different from the political orientation of my classmates at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. So that's supposedly the elite, but they were as clueless about the left wing as most Americans were, because they were affected by the same culture war against the left that came out of World War II.
Hanson calls it a war of values, where merit is replaced by identity, history is rewritten by activists, and truth is sacrificed at the altar of ideology. He believes what we're witnessing is not organic social change, but a deliberate cultural revolution, echoing the radical purges of Mao's China or the moral upheaval of France's Jacobin era. Under this revolution, the law bends for the powerful, competence is optional, and America's institutions are corroded by politics disguised as progress. But to economist Richard Wolff, Hanson's warning is just another shadow play, a moral panic that distracts from the real crisis, capitalism itself. Hanson sees a nation adrift, sinking in moral decay. Wolff sees a system designed to fail. One speaks in the language of the founders, the other in Marx's. But they agree on this. America is breaking. What comes next, revival or rupture, depends on which vision wins. So, which future do you choose?